Everything was still there. The lights were on. The cars were parked outside. Their bags were untouched. Their makeup was still inside the house. Even the bed showed signs that someone had been getting ready to sleep. The family dog was still there too. It looked as if the women had simply stepped out for a moment. But there was one problem. The women were gone. Not one person. 3, a mother, her daughter, and her daughter's friend. Springfield, Missouri. June 1992. More than 30 years later, it remains one of the most disturbing, unsolved disappearances in American history. This is the mystery of the Springfield Three. June 6th, 1992. It was graduation night. Susie Streeter and her friend, Stacy McCall, spent the evening celebrating with friends. That night, the city felt more alive than usual. Graduates talked about the future. Friends laughed, took pictures, and stayed out late together. Some talked about college. Others talked about summer trips and new beginnings. It was supposed to be an ordinary American graduation night. The girls moved from house to house, attending different graduation parties. At first, they planned to stay at another friend's home, but the house became overcrowded. So late that night, they changed plans. Instead, they decided to stay at Susie's house. Susie lived there with her mother, Cheryl Levitt. At the time, Cheryl worked as a hairdresser and was known as a warm, friendly, and outgoing woman. Friends often visited the house. People described it as comfortable and welcoming. Meanwhile, Stacy McCall already had plans for the next morning. She was supposed to leave early for a water park trip. Her bags had already been packed. In other words, there was very little reason for her to suddenly disappear on her own. That night marked the end of graduation for some. For others, it was the beginning of a new chapter. But for these 3 women, it became the final night anyone would ever see them alive. No one could have imagined that this would be the last time they were ever seen. The next morning, friends and family members went looking for Susie and Stacy. That was when they noticed something strange. The cars were still there. Susie's car, Stacy's car, both parked outside the house. The lights inside were still on. Some reports even claimed the television was still running. The family dog had been left behind inside the home. At first glance, it looked as though the women had simply gone somewhere for a short time. But something felt wrong. Their wallets were still there. Cigarettes were still inside the house. Clothes, makeup, personal belongings. Everything had been left behind. There were even reports that Susie's contact lenses were still inside the home. According to people close to her, Susie had poor eyesight and would have struggled to travel far without them. And yet, the women were gone. There were no clear signs of forced entry, no blood, no obvious signs of a violent struggle. Nothing looked overturned, no furniture had been knocked over. Nothing appeared chaotic. People who entered the house later described the same unsettling feeling. The house was unnaturally quiet. The television was on. Signs of everyday life were everywhere. But the human presence was gone. Everything looked normal. And somehow, that made the silence feel even worse. The house felt too calm, too still, as if the people inside had simply vanished. But the house was not completely untouched. Near the front porch, glass had been shattered. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a broken porch light globe. Stacy's mother, who had arrived at the scene early, reportedly cleaned up the glass without thinking much about it. She simply did not want anyone getting hurt. But years later, people began looking back at that moment differently. What if that glass had been important evidence? What if the killer had left something behind? Some even wondered if the broken light had been intentional. Could someone have tampered with it beforehand, pretending to replace the bulb, watching the house, waiting for the right moment? Some investigators and case followers believe the offender may have been familiar with the home long before the women disappeared. And then there were the phone calls. After the disappearance, strange calls reportedly came into the house. People who answered described a man making obscene comments. Police were never able to trace the calls, but one detail became especially disturbing. A message left on the answering machine was accidentally erased. No one knows what that message said. And even stranger, no one has ever fully confirmed who deleted it. Some believe that message may have contained a critical clue. There was another unsettling detail as well. Stacy's clothing appeared neatly folded inside the home. But according to some reports, her underwear was missing. For many investigators and followers of the case, that detail strongly suggested the possibility of a violent crime rather than a voluntary disappearance. Inside the house, there were signs that the women had been settling in for the night. Sleepwear had been laid out. There were reports that makeup had already been removed. The beds themselves appeared to have been used. That detail mattered, because it suggested at least one of the women had been preparing to sleep. If they had suddenly decided to leave, why were all of their personal belongings still inside the house? Why were the cars still outside? Why had the dog been left behind? But perhaps the strangest detail of all was the lack of violence inside the home. Some people focused on the dog. If a complete stranger had entered the house, would the dog not have barked violently? Would the house not have shown more signs of panic? Of course, none of this proves anything, but it added to the unsettling possibility that whoever approached the women may have done so quietly without causing panic. Some investigators believed the women may have opened the door willingly. Perhaps it was someone they recognized, or perhaps the offender used a weapon and gained control very quickly. Either way, something about the situation felt deeply wrong. 3 women were inside that house, and yet almost nobody reported hearing screams, no major disturbance, no sounds of a violent struggle. That is part of what makes this case so terrifying. It feels less like a kidnapping, and more like 3 people quietly disappeared into the night. The victims were not just names in a police file, they were real people. The first was Cheryl Levitt. She was 47 years old, Susie's mother. Friends described her as warm, social, and easy to talk to. Her home was the kind of place where her daughter's friends felt comfortable visiting. The second was Susie Streeter, 19 years old. She had just graduated high school. People described her as free-spirited and independent. She was standing at the beginning of a brand new chapter in life. The third was Stacy McCall, 18 years old, close to her friends, close to her family. She had plans the next morning, a trip waiting for her, a home she was expected to return to. When Stacy failed to come home, her mother went looking for her. That was when the situation began to feel wrong. The cars were there, But the women were gone. The house still looked lived in, but the people inside had vanished. At first, it may not have seemed like an emergency. Maybe they had stepped out briefly. Maybe they would return any minute. But as time passed, the reality became harder to ignore. No phone calls, no explanation, no trace. That was the moment the nightmare truly began. As the investigation continued, strange witness reports began to surface. One woman claimed she saw suspicious men walking nearby during the early morning hours. Another witness reported seeing a light-colored van near the home. Some even claimed they saw women being forced into a vehicle, but none of the sightings could ever be fully confirmed. Soon the case spread across the United States. Police received thousands of tips, but most of them led nowhere. The deeper investigators looked, the more confusing the case became. Over time, several possible suspects were discussed, but one name stood out more than the others: Robert Cox. At the time, he was living near Springfield and already had a criminal history. Some people suspected he may have been involved in other violent crimes as well. But what truly disturbed investigators and the public was something he reportedly said. During interviews, Cox allegedly implied that the three women would never be found. That statement shocked many people. Why would he say something like that? Did he actually know something? Or was he simply trying to draw attention to himself? What made the statement even more chilling was the timing. At that point, nobody knew what had happened to the women. Their fate was still completely unknown, and yet he spoke as though the ending had already been decided. Still, there was never enough evidence to charge him. His words created suspicion, but never enough proof. And to this day, no one knows who entered that house that night. Decades have passed since the disappearance, but even today, the bodies of the three women have never been found. No arrests, no clear evidence, no answers. Too much time has passed. Memories faded. Witness accounts changed. Potential evidence may have disappeared forever. Yet people still ask the same questions. Why were there so few signs of violence? How could three women vanish at the same time? And why did almost nobody hear anything? Some believe the women were taken far away from Springfield. Others think they may have been moved out of the city almost immediately after the crime. But over the years, one theory became especially infamous. Some people believe the bodies of the three women may be buried beneath a hospital parking garage. According to the theory, their remains are hidden beneath the south parking structure of Cox Hospital in Springfield. At first, the story sounded like nothing more than an urban legend. But then people noticed something unsettling. Back in June of 1992, the hospital was reportedly expanding the parking structure. Concrete work was actively taking place around the same time the women disappeared. If someone needed to hide bodies quickly, a construction site would have been the perfect place. Years later, an investigator reportedly paid for ground-penetrating radar scans of the parking garage. What the scans revealed shocked many people. According to reports, three unusual shapes were detected beneath the concrete, roughly 1 meter underground. Some claimed the shapes resembled three bodies lying side by side. The story spread across America. People were horrified. Could the women really be buried beneath that parking garage? But the site was never excavated. Police stated there was not enough evidence to justify digging beneath the structure. the cost of excavation, the disruption to the hospital, and uncertainty surrounding the radar data all became reasons not to move forward. So the parking garage remains untouched, and even today, cars continue driving over it every single day. If the women truly are buried beneath that concrete, then the truth has been hidden there for more than 30 years. And still, the mystery remains unsolved. Everything was left behind: the lights, the cars, the bags, the beds, the signs of everyday life, but the people were gone, as if someone had entered that brightly lit house and quietly taken all three women away. And maybe, somewhere inside that house that night, someone was watching the moment they disappeared. No screams, no chaos, no clear signs of violence. The women simply vanished, and all that remains now is an illuminated house, abandoned cars, broken glass, a deleted message, and a question buried beneath concrete. That night, inside a quiet home in Springfield, Missouri, what really happened to the Springfield Three? And who took them into the night? If this story left you wondering, the next one is waiting for you. Subscribe and stay with us.